Imagine two people earning the exact same salary, living in the same city, the same age, with the same amount of money in the bank. Jake believes the smartest thing a middle-class person can do is keep upgrading his lifestyle as his income rises. Better car, bigger house, nicer neighborhood. Tells himself that this is what financial success is supposed to look like. Marcus does almost the opposite. Every time his income rises, he keeps his lifestyle nearly the same and sends the difference into investments. They both think they made the smarter choice. They're both wrong. Because the biggest money lie middle-class people still believe isn't that saving is important. It's something much more subtle. It's the belief that looking financially successful and becoming financially secure are the same thing. They aren't. And when we run the numbers over 5 years, 10 years, and 20 years, the gap between those two ideas gets uncomfortable. So let's make this fair. Jake and Marcus are both 35 years old. They live in the same city. They each earn $90,000 a year. Each has $40,000 in savings. Neither has debt outside the decision we're about to compare. Their salaries grow by 3% a year. Now here's where they separate. Jake believes the responsible middle-class move is to buy the house he can comfortably afford. He buys a $360,000 home with 20% down, or $72,000. After closing costs of roughly 3%, another $10,800 disappears immediately. That leaves him with almost no liquid savings. His mortgage is $288,000 at 5% for 30 years. His principal and interest payment is about $1,820 a month. Then come the costs nobody puts in the listing price. Property taxes, roughly $300 a month. Homeowners insurance, about $125. Maintenance, let's reserve 1% of the home's value every year, or $3,600 annually. And that's before utilities, repairs, appliances, landscaping, and the occasional expense that seems to arrive precisely when you don't have room for it. Marcus rents a similar home for $1,800 a month. That sounds boring. Jake gets the keys. Marcus gets another line on a bank statement. One feels like progress, the other feels like doing nothing. But feelings and math are two very different things. Marcus keeps his $40,000 invested instead of putting it into the house. He also invests the monthly difference whenever his total housing cost is lower than Jake's. Assume a long-term investment return of 7% a year, not guaranteed, not smooth, just a planning assumption so we can compare the two paths. Now let's watch what happens. Year 1. Jake has made 12 mortgage payments totaling about $21,840 in principal and interest. But only roughly $2,000 of that has reduced the loan balance. The rest is interest. Add approximately $3,600 of maintenance, $3,600 of property taxes, and $1,500 of insurance. His first-year housing outflow is around $30,500. On paper, Jake owns a $360,000 asset. Sounds great until you subtract everything else. Marcus pays $21,600 in rent. If we assume rent rises 3% annually, that number will change over time, but for year 1, he's keeping far more cash flexible. And that $40,000 he didn't put into the house has another job. At 7%, it earns about $2,800 in expected investment growth. So on day 1, Jake owns more real estate. Marcus owns more liquidity. That distinction matters. Year 3. Jake has now paid roughly $65,500 in mortgage principal and interest. His remaining mortgage is around $280,000. Suppose the house appreciated 3% annually. The property is now worth roughly $393,000. Jake looks at that number and feels rich. His home gained about $33,000 in value. But that's the number everyone loves to quote. The hidden number is the cost of getting there. Over 3 years, Jake has also paid roughly $10,800 in property taxes, around $4,500 in insurance, and about $10,800 in maintenance. That's more than $26,000 before utilities or larger repairs. And remember, the $72,000 down payment and $10,800 in closing costs had an opportunity cost. If that $82,800 had stayed invested at 7%, it could have grown to roughly $101,000 after 3 years. Marcus, meanwhile, has kept that capital invested. His original $40,000 grows to about $49,000. And because his rent started at $1,800 while Jake's total recurring housing cost is around $2,245 before maintenance, Marcus has room to invest the difference. Even a $400 monthly investment at 7% grows to roughly $15,500 after 3 years. So Marcus has approximately $64,500 in that simplified investment account. Jake has roughly $113,000 of home equity. Looks like Jake is winning, but we're not done, because we haven't asked the most important question. How much of Jake's apparent wealth came from the house rising in value, and how much came from money he had to put into the house to keep it running? That's where the story starts getting complicated. Year 5 is where the middle-class money lie becomes much easier to see. Jake's home, assuming that same 3% annual appreciation, is now worth about $417,000. His mortgage balance has fallen to roughly $267,000. So his home equity is approximately $150,000. That's a big number, and yes, it's real wealth. But getting there required 5 years of mortgage payments, property taxes, insurance, maintenance, and the original cash tied up in the purchase. Let's put the maintenance alone into perspective. At $3,600 a year, that's $18,000 over 5 years. And 1% isn't some outrageous assumption. A roof, HVAC system, plumbing issue, exterior repair, or appliance replacement can easily push an individual year much higher. Now look at Marcus. His original $40,000 at 7% becomes about $56,000. His hypothetical $400 monthly investment becomes roughly $28,600. Together, that's around $84,600. And remember, he's still renting. So is Jake actually losing? No. And this is where we have to be careful. The lesson isn't that buying a house is bad. Jake has something Marcus doesn't have: leverage. He controlled a $360,000 asset with $72,000 down. If the property appreciates, Jake participates in the growth of the entire property, not just his initial cash. That's powerful. But leverage works in both directions. If the house falls 10%, that's a $36,000 decline in the property's value. Jake doesn't get to say, well, I only invested $72,000. The market doesn't care. And there's another number middle-class buyers rarely think about: transaction costs. Jake paid roughly $10,800 in closing costs before he had even spent one night in the house. If he sells later, the selling costs could easily run around 6% in a traditional transaction. On a $417,000 sale, that's about $25,000. So the house can appreciate substantially without that entire increase becoming spendable wealth. On paper, that's $57,000 of appreciation. Sounds great until you subtract everything else. And that's the trap. Not the house, not the rent. The trap is looking at one number and calling it the whole story. Jake sees $417,000. Marcus sees an investment account. Neither number tells you what it actually costs to create that wealth. And that's exactly where we need to go next, because the flashy number is only the first layer. By year 10, the difference between the two paths becomes much harder to hide. Jake's house, growing at 3% a year, is now worth roughly $484,000. His mortgage balance has fallen to about $238,000. So his equity is approximately $246,000. That sounds fantastic. But now add the decade of friction. Mortgage interest has consumed well over $200,000 by this point. Property taxes have cost roughly $42,000 if they average around $350 a month over the period. Insurance has cost around $18,000. Maintenance, even using that modest 1% rule, has consumed roughly $43,000 as the home's value increased. And if Jake has replaced a water heater for $1,500, repaired an HVAC system for $5,000, replaced appliances for $3,000, and dealt with another $5,000 to $10,000 of miscellaneous repairs, he's easily another $15,000 to $10,000. On paper, that's nearly $484,000 of property. Sounds great until you subtract everything else. Now Marcus. His original $40,000 invested at 7% has grown to roughly $78,700. His $400 monthly investment has grown to about $69,200. And if his rent started at $1,800 and increased 3% annually, his housing cost has risen significantly, but he's still avoided the property taxes, major repairs, and selling costs attached to ownership. His investment portfolio is now around $148,000 from those two sources alone. And here's the flip point. Jake still has more visible net worth from the housing asset, but Marcus has something Jake doesn't: capital that isn't trapped inside four walls. If Marcus needs $20,000 tomorrow, he can sell part of an investment account. If Jake needs $20,000 tomorrow because his roof fails, he may have to borrow against the house, use credit, or drain whatever cash reserves he's rebuilt. This is the part middle-class people often misunderstand. Net worth and financial flexibility aren't the same thing. You can be a millionaire on paper and still feel broke on Tuesday morning. And now we get to the biggest money lie. People say, "My house went up $124,000. That's the flashy number. But the real question is, how much did it cost me to create that $124,000? Because underneath that headline are layers. Interest. Jake paid the bank interest so he could control the property. Over the first 10 years, his mortgage interest alone is roughly $210,000. That's not equity. That's the price of borrowing. Then there's maintenance. At 1% of property value, you're looking at roughly $3,600 in the early years and closer to $4,800 later. That's $40,000 plus over a decade before the unusual repair arrives. Then there's property tax. At roughly $300 to $400 a month, that's $36,000 to $48,000 to $400 a month. Then insurance. At roughly $125 to $175 a month, that's another $15,000 to $21,000. Then there's the invisible cost nobody sends you a bill for: opportunity cost. Jake's $82,800 of initial cash could have been invested. At 7%, after 10 years, that money could be worth about $163,000. He didn't lose $163,000 in cash. He gave up the possibility of having that $163,000. That's different, but it's still part of the math. And then there's the cost of moving. If Jake sells the house at year 10 for approximately $484,000 and pays a hypothetical 6% in selling expenses, that's about $29,000. On paper, that's a $124,000 increase in value. Sounds great until you subtract the selling cost. Now, here's the important balance. If I only showed you the downsides of owning a home, I'd be doing what every financial influencer does when they're trying to sell you a conclusion. Buying can absolutely win. If Jake stays in the house for 20 years, the leverage becomes powerful. If the home appreciates at 3% annually, that $360,000 property becomes roughly $650,000. Meanwhile, the mortgage eventually disappears. That means Jake could own a $650,000 asset with no mortgage balance. Marcus doesn't get that automatic payoff. He has to keep investing. He has to tolerate market declines. He has to avoid selling at the wrong time. And he doesn't get the psychological benefit of knowing that his housing payment can eventually disappear. That's real. So let's give Jake the conditions where buying wins. If comparable rent is $2,500 while the all-in ownership cost is $2,300, buying starts looking much better. If Jake expects to stay for 15 or 20 years, the transaction costs become less important. If the property appreciates 4% instead of 3%, the outcome changes dramatically. And if Jake buys a property below market value, rents out part of it, or house hacks by generating $700 a month from a roommate, the math can shift again. That's not hype. That's arithmetic. Now let's take the timeline all the way to year 20. Jake's house at 3% annual appreciation is worth roughly $650,000. His mortgage is gone. His equity is therefore around $650,000. But he has spent 20 years paying taxes, insurance, maintenance, interest, and transaction costs. Marcus's original $40,000 left invested at 7% becomes roughly $155,000. His $400 monthly investment becomes roughly $208,000. That's about $363,000. And that's before considering what happens if the monthly savings gap changes. Here's where the comparison gets interesting. If Marcus can increase his monthly investment from $400 to $700, The extra $300 doesn't sound dramatic. It's only $3,600 a year. But over 20 years at 7%, that additional $300 a month can grow to roughly $156,000. One small monthly decision can create a six-figure difference. That's why the biggest money lie isn't really about renting or buying. It's the belief that your biggest financial decisions happen when you sign the mortgage. They don't. They happen every month afterward. What you spend, what you invest, what you borrow, what you keep, what you upgrade, and what you refuse to upgrade. There's also a real tax consideration. The IRS says eligible homeowners may be able to exclude up to $250,000 of gain when selling a main home, or up to $500,000 for qualifying married couples filing jointly, generally if the ownership and use requirements are met. IRS 1. That's a real benefit of homeownership. But notice the wording: eligible, qualifying, requirements. The tax benefit exists, but it doesn't magically turn every home purchase into a winning investment. Now let's make this practical. Step 1. Stop comparing rent with the mortgage payment. Compare rent with the entire ownership cost: mortgage, taxes, insurance, maintenance, HOA if there is one, and the opportunity cost of the down payment. Step 2. Run the investment alternative. Take the down payment and closing costs and calculate what they could become if invested. Then calculate the monthly difference between renting and owning. Don't guess. Put the actual number into the equation. Step 3. Stress test the decision. Run the house at 0% appreciation, then 3%, then 5%. Run rent increases at 2%, 3%, and 5%. Add a $10,000 repair. Add a 6-month period where you can't easily sell. If the decision only works under perfect conditions, you don't have a strong decision. You have a fragile one. And there's one more lever that changes everything: income. If Jake earns $90,000 today but increases his income to $120,000 while keeping his housing cost around the same, he can redirect $1,000 or more each month toward investments. That can overwhelm small differences between renting and buying. Likewise, if Marcus earns more but increases his lifestyle every time his paycheck rises, his investment advantage can disappear. This is the deeper lesson. Middle-class wealth isn't usually destroyed by one spectacular mistake. It's eroded by dozens of decisions that feel reasonable: a $500 higher car payment, a $300 larger housing payment, a $200 monthly subscription stack, a vacation financed instead of saved for, a promotion followed by a lifestyle upgrade. Each one looks harmless. Together, they become the difference between having $100,000 invested and having $100,000 of extra stuff. Now go back to Jake and Marcus. Jake walked away thinking he made the smart play. He believed the house was the responsible choice because it was an asset, because his friends owned homes, and because the property value kept rising. Marcus walked away thinking he made the smart play. He believed renting was smarter because he kept his money invested and avoided the headaches of ownership. But neither one actually ran the full numbers. Jake focused on the house price. Marcus focused on the investment return. Neither initially counted everything. And that's the real trap. The real trap isn't renting or buying. The real trap is making the decision based on hype, headlines, or someone else's opinion instead of running the numbers for your own situation. Because your rent-to-price ratio might be completely different. Your mortgage rate might be different. Your taxes might be different. Your maintenance costs might be different. Your expected time in the home might be different. Your investment return might be different. And your behavior might be the biggest variable of all. Two people can make opposite financial decisions and both come out ahead. And two people can make the exact same decision and get completely different results. If you're wondering what happens when you combine the smartest parts of both strategies, that's a completely different conversation. Because there are situations where you can rent strategically, invest aggressively, and eventually buy from a position of strength instead of buying simply because everyone says you're supposed to. Did you include everything? Because the answer that includes everything is the only answer that matters. If this video helped you see something you didn't know was there, subscribe to Money Mindset Lab and hit the notification bell. We break down the hidden math behind the financial decisions you face every day.